The Monday morning client meeting started like any other, but it would change my entire career. I sat in the cramped conference room, clutching my laptop and the presentation I'd spent my weekend perfecting. My palms were sweaty as I waited for my turn to speak. When Paul, my manager, finally called on me, I stood up with shaking hands and began presenting my campaign strategy. I'd researched for hours, analyzed competitor data, and created what I believed was a fresh approach that could revolutionize their brand messaging. The core concept focuses on authentic storytelling that connects with younger demographics while maintaining brand integrity, I explained, clicking through my slides with growing confidence. That's when it happened. Paul actually laughed out loud. Not a polite chuckle or encouraging smile, but a full belly laugh that echoed through the silent conference room. "That's cute, Rachel," he said, still chuckling as he looked around the table like he was sharing a joke with the other adults. "Leave the real work to the grown-ups, okay?" The room went completely silent. My face burned with embarrassment as I felt every pair of eyes on me. I wanted to disappear into the floor, but instead I just stood there, frozen, holding my laptop like a shield. In that horrible moment of silence, I noticed something everyone else missed. Mr. Adams, our potential client, wasn't laughing along with Paul. Instead, he was frowning slightly, looking directly at me. There was something in his expression I couldn't read. It wasn't pity or embarrassment like I expected. It looked more like curiosity, maybe even interest. His pen was poised over his notepad, and he seemed to be waiting for me to continue. But Paul had already moved on, waving his hand dismissively. "Rachel, you can sit down now. Thanks for that attempt." I closed my laptop and sank back into my chair, my cheeks still burning. Around the table, my coworkers avoided eye contact, staring at their phones or shuffling papers. The awkwardness was suffocating. Mr. Adams continued to watch me for a few more seconds before turning back to Paul. But I caught him glancing in my direction several times throughout the meeting, and each time, that same curious expression crossed his face. Something about his reaction gave me a tiny spark of hope amid my humiliation. Maybe not everyone thought my idea was ridiculous. I nodded politely and forced a smile, but inside I was boiling with rage. The anger felt like hot lava flowing through my veins, and I gripped the edge of my chair to keep my hands from shaking. I had poured my heart into that presentation. I'd spent Saturday and Sunday at the office, researching market trends, analyzing demographics, and crafting a strategy one genuinely believed could transform their approach. I'd skipped plans with friends, missed family dinner, and stayed up until 2 a.m. perfecting every detail. And Paul had dismissed it all like it was a child's crayon drawing. The worst part wasn't the public humiliation, though that stung enough to bring tears to my eyes. It was the casual way he'd done it, like my effort meant nothing. Like I meant nothing. Like 3 years of working at this company, learning the business, and proving myself counted for zero. I sat there trying to look professional while internally screaming. Every muscle in my body was tense with the effort of staying calm. But underneath the anger was something else, a cold, hard determination I'd never felt before. Paul had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He just didn't know it yet. Paul stood up with the confident swagger of someone who'd never doubted his own genius. He smoothed down his tie and launched into his presentation with theatrical flair that made me want to roll my eyes. "Now, let me show you a real strategy," he announced, clicking to his first slide. "This approach has been tested and proven in the marketplace." As he began talking, I realized with growing disbelief that I'd seen this exact presentation before. It was the same campaign we'd used for a different client 2 years ago. Paul had literally just changed the company name and logo, keeping everything else identical. The recycled PowerPoint slides, the outdated statistics, even the same stock photos, it was all the same. He was presenting a strategy designed for a clothing retailer to a tech startup, acting like it was cutting-edge brilliance designed specifically for their needs. But he delivered it with such confidence and authority that you'd think he'd invented marketing himself. He gestured dramatically, made eye contact with everyone around the table, and spoke in that smooth, persuasive tone that had gotten him promoted to manager. I watched Mr. Adams' face carefully as Paul spoke, looking for any sign of recognition that this was obviously recycled material. About halfway through Paul's recycled presentation, Mr. Adams suddenly interrupted him. "Excuse me, Paul," he said politely but firmly. "Rachel, what was the last part of your idea again?" "The part about authentic storytelling." My heart jumped into my throat. I opened my mouth to answer, excited that someone actually wanted to hear more about my concept. But before I could get a single word out, Paul jumped in. "Don't worry about that," he said quickly, his voice taking on a slightly sharp edge. "It's not really relevant to what we're discussing here. Rachel's still learning the ropes, so her ideas tend to be a bit theoretical." The dismissal stung worse than his original laughter. At least when he'd mocked me openly, it had felt honest. This felt patronizing and condescending, like he was protecting the client from wasting time on my silly little thoughts. Mr. Adams looked like he wanted to press the issue, glancing between Paul and me with obvious frustration. But corporate politeness won out, and he simply nodded and gestured for Paul to continue. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. The professional thing to do was stay quiet, let Paul finish his presentation, and address this privately later. But inside, I was making mental notes of everything, every dismissal, every condescending comment, every moment he treated me like I was invisible. After the meeting ended, I started gathering my papers and laptop, hoping to escape without further humiliation. But Paul had other plans. He walked over and patted my shoulder like I was a golden retriever who'd just learned to sit. "You're here to learn, Rachel," he said in that fake-friendly tone that made my skin crawl. "Watching the experienced team members is how you'll pick up the real skills you need." I forced myself to nod and smile, even though I wanted to shrug his hand off my shoulder and tell him exactly what I thought of his experience. "Next time," he continued, still wearing that condescending smile, "maybe just bring coffee instead of trying to present ideas. Leave the strategic thinking to those of us who actually know what we're doing." The suggestion hit me like a slap. Bring coffee instead of ideas. Like I was some secretary or intern instead of a marketing coordinator with 3 years of experience and a communications degree. I managed to mumble something that might have sounded like agreement and hurried out before I said something that would get me fired. But as I walked back to my cubicle, I felt something shifting inside me. I was done being treated like this. Paul had just pushed me too far. That evening, I was sitting at my kitchen table eating leftover Chinese food and trying to forget about the disaster of a day when my phone buzzed with a new email. I almost ignored it, assuming it was just another work request that could wait until morning. But when I glanced at the sender, my chopsticks clattered to the table. It was from Mr. Adams, the client from this morning's meeting. My hands actually started shaking as I opened the message. "Hi, Rachel," it read. "I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. I got your email address from your company's website. I was hoping you could send me your proposal in more detail. I'd really like to see the full concept without any interruptions. I found your initial presentation very intriguing and would love to understand your complete vision. Best regards, Michael Adams." I read the email 3 times before it fully sank in. He wanted to see my proposal. He'd found my presentation intriguing. He'd gone to the trouble of looking up my email address because he was genuinely interested in my ideas. My hands were trembling as I typed back, "Of course, Mr. Adams. I'd be happy to send you the complete proposal. Thank you for your interest." After I hit send, I sat back in my chair and stared at my laptop screen in amazement. Maybe this day wasn't the disaster I'd thought it was. I spent the next hour frantically polishing my proposal, adding details I hadn't had time to include in the original presentation, and making sure every chart and graph was perfect. The document ended up being 14 pages of comprehensive research, strategic analysis, and detailed implementation plans. As I attached the file to my email, I felt a mix of excitement and terror. This was my shot, maybe my only shot, to prove that my ideas weren't just cute or theoretical. This was my chance to show what I could really do when given the opportunity. I wrote a professional cover email explaining each section of the proposal and clicked send before I could second-guess myself. Then I sat back and tried not to get my hopes up too much. "For all I knew, Mr. Adams was just being polite. Maybe he'd skim through it and send back a generic, "Thanks for your time" response. Maybe this was just his way of letting me down easy after Paul's public humiliation. But deep down, I had a feeling this was bigger than that. The way he'd looked at me during the meeting, the fact that he'd taken the time to track down my contact information, the genuine interest in his email, it all felt like something was shifting. I barely slept that night, checking my phone every few minutes like a teenager waiting for a text from their crush. When my alarm went off at 6 a.m., I immediately grabbed my phone to check my email. There it was. A response from Mr. Adams, sent at 11:47 p.m. the night before. "Rachel," the email began, "this is absolutely excellent work. Your strategic approach is exactly the kind of fresh thinking our company needs. The market analysis is thorough, the creative concepts are innovative, and the implementation timeline is realistic and well-planned. I'm genuinely impressed." I had to read that paragraph 3 times before it felt real. He was impressed. He thought my work was excellent. Everything Paul had dismissed as amateur and irrelevant, Mr. Adams saw as professional and innovative. But he wasn't finished. The email continued. "Would you be available for a phone call tomorrow afternoon? I'd love to discuss this proposal in more detail and explore how we might move forward. I think there's real potential here for something special." I almost cried reading those words. After months of being ignored, dismissed, and treated like an inexperienced child, someone finally saw the value in my work. Someone finally recognized that I had something worthwhile to contribute. I immediately typed back confirming my availability, trying to keep my response professional despite the fact that I was practically bouncing in my chair with excitement. The hardest part of that entire day was acting normal around Paul. When he strolled into the office with his usual swagger, making jokes with the other senior team members and completely ignoring my existence, I had to bite my tongue to keep from smiling. He had no idea what was happening behind the scenes. He didn't know that the client he'd tried so hard to impress was more interested in my amateur ideas than his recycled presentation. For the first time in my career, I had information that Paul didn't have, and it felt like holding a winning lottery ticket. During our team meeting that morning, Paul mentioned the client presentation casually. "I think yesterday's meeting went really well," he said, looking pleased with himself. The client seemed very responsive to our strategic approach. I nodded along with everyone else, but inside I was laughing. If only he knew that our strategic approach wasn't what had caught the client's attention at all. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and Paul was completely oblivious. For years, he'd held all the cards, the client relationships, the decision-making authority, the ability to make or break my career. But now I had something he didn't. Direct access to a client who valued my work. It was like having a secret weapon that he couldn't see coming. At exactly 2 o'clock that afternoon, my phone rang with Mr. Adams' call. I'd been nervous all morning, rehearsing what I wanted to say and trying to calm my racing heart. But as soon as we started talking, all my anxiety melted away. "Rachel, I have to tell you," he began, "your proposal is exactly what we've been looking for. It's fresh, it's strategic, and it shows a real understanding of our target market that I haven't seen from other agencies." I managed to thank him professionally, even though I felt like doing cartwheels around my cubicle. Then he said the words that changed everything. "I'd like you to lead this project if you're willing. I want to work directly with you on implementing this strategy." My heart literally stopped beating for a moment. "Lead the project?" I repeated, making sure I'd heard correctly. "Absolutely. Your vision, your strategy, your leadership. I've been in business long enough to recognize real talent when I see it, and you clearly have something special." I tried to keep my voice steady as I responded. "Yes, Mr. Adams. I would be honored to lead this project." After we hung up, I sat in my cubicle staring at my computer screen in shock. Had that really just happened? Had a major client just asked me, not Paul, not the senior team, but me, to lead a project? But then Mr. Adams added something that made the situation even more incredible. "I do have one condition though," he said, his tone becoming more serious. "I want you in charge of this project, not Paul or anyone else from your management team." I was not impressed with the approach they presented yesterday. I almost dropped the phone. He wasn't just asking me to be involved in the project, he was specifically requesting that Paul not be in charge. The same Paul who had mocked my ideas and told me to stick to bringing coffee. Can you handle being the primary point of contact? Mr. Adams continued. I know that might put you in a difficult position with your current management structure, but I believe in leading with talent, not just hierarchy. This was it. This was my moment to either step up and claim my place or shrink back into the safe, familiar role of junior team member who never rocked the boat. Absolutely, I said, surprised by how confident my voice sounded. I can definitely handle that responsibility. Excellent. I'll be sending an email to your team later today to formalize this arrangement. I'm looking forward to working with you, Rachel. After we hung up, I sat there trembling with excitement and terror. I'd just agreed to lead a major project, going directly around my manager. This was either going to be the best decision of my career or the thing that got me fired. About an hour later, the email arrived. I watched it pop up in my inbox, and I could see from the CC line that it had been sent to Paul, our department head, and several other senior team members. Good afternoon, Mr. Adams had written. After reviewing the proposals presented yesterday, we've decided to move forward with Rachel's strategic approach. We'd like Rachel to serve as the primary point of contact for this project moving forward. Please loop her in on all communications and give her the authority she needs to implement her vision effectively. We're excited to get started. I stared at the email in disbelief.
It was really happening.
A major client had just publicly endorsed my work and requested that I lead the project. All those people who had ignored me, dismissed me, and treated me like I was invisible were now going to have to take orders from me. Within minutes, I could see people around the office checking their phones and computers. Word was already starting to spread. I watched as Paul's desk phone rang, probably someone calling to tell him about the email if he hadn't seen it yet. From my cubicle, I had a clear view of his office. I waited, barely breathing, to see his reaction when he read Mr. Adams' message. It was going to be priceless. When Paul finally opened the email, I watched his face go through a fascinating series of expressions. First confusion, then disbelief, then anger that started as a slight frown and built into a full scowl. He shot up from his desk chair and marched directly over to my cubicle, his face getting redder with each step. By the time he reached me, he looked like he was about to explode. What did you do? He hissed, leaning over my desk in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate me. What did you say to him? I looked up at him calmly, feeling more confident than I ever had in his presence. I sent the client my proposal, like he asked me to. You went behind my back. Paul's voice was getting louder, and I could see other people in nearby cubicles starting to pay attention to our conversation. I responded to a direct request from a client. I replied evenly. I would think that's exactly what we're supposed to do in this business. Paul's jaw clenched as he realized that I was technically correct. He couldn't really punish me for responding to a client's request, especially when that response had resulted in us winning the account. But I could see the wheels turning in his head, and I knew he was already planning ways to make my life difficult. Paul didn't like being shown up, and he especially didn't like being shown up by someone he considered beneath him. This was just the beginning of the war. Within an hour, word had spread throughout the entire office. I could feel the change in atmosphere immediately. People who usually walked past my cubicle without acknowledging my existence were suddenly making eye contact and offering tentative smiles. My coworker Marcus, who sat in the cubicle next to mine, leaned over the partition. Holy crap, Rachel, he whispered. Did you really just land Adam's account? I nodded, still trying to process everything myself. It looks that way. That's incredible, he said, shaking his head in amazement. Paul must be losing his mind. He wasn't wrong. I could see Paul through his office window, pacing back and forth while talking animatedly on the phone. His gestures were getting bigger and more agitated by the minute. But it wasn't just Paul's reaction that had changed. For the first time in 3 years, my coworkers were looking at me with something that looked like respect. People who had never bothered to learn my name were suddenly introducing themselves and asking about my strategy. The shift in office dynamics was almost as satisfying as landing the account itself. If you're enjoying this workplace revenge story, Make sure to subscribe for more incredible tales of standing up to toxic bosses and getting the recognition you deserve. Paul's retaliation came swift and predictable. The next morning, I found a new assignment waiting in my email inbox, a list of administrative tasks that had absolutely nothing to do with marketing or the Adams project. Due to your new responsibilities, the email read, I'll need you to take over some basic operational duties to free up the senior team members for strategic work. Please handle the filing for the Henderson account, update our client contact database, and organize the supply closet inventory. It was petty revenge disguised as workload management. Paul was trying to bury me in busy work, hoping to derail my project or make me too overwhelmed to succeed. He wanted to prove that I couldn't handle the responsibility Mr. Adams had given me. But what Paul didn't count on was Mr. Adams continuing to communicate with me directly. While Paul was trying to saddle me with filing and inventory, my inbox was filling up with strategic discussions, budget approvals, and creative direction from the client. Every time Paul assigned me another meaningless task, Mr. Adams would send another email asking for my input on campaign messaging or timeline adjustments. It became almost comical. I'd be organizing office supplies while simultaneously making decisions about a six-figure marketing campaign. Paul's attempts to diminish my role were being completely undermined by the client's direct involvement. Everything came to a head when Mr. Adams decided to visit our office the following week. Paul spent days preparing for the visit, clearly hoping to reassert his authority and maybe convince the client that he should be managing the project after all. But when Mr. Adams walked into our office, he headed straight for my cubicle without even acknowledging Paul's presence. Rachel, he said warmly, extending his hand for a firm handshake. It's so great to finally meet you in person. The work you've been doing has been absolutely fantastic. I stood up to shake his hand, acutely aware that every person in the office was watching our interaction. Thank you, Mr. Adams. I'm thrilled to be working on this project. Please call me Michael, he said with a genuine smile. I have to say, your latest revisions to the campaign messaging are exactly what we were hoping for. You really understand our brand vision. Behind him, I could see Paul hovering awkwardly, clearly waiting for an opportunity to insert himself into the conversation. But Michael was completely focused on me, discussing strategy details and asking about my recommendations for the next phase of the campaign. For 15 minutes, we talked shop while Paul stood there like a piece of furniture, unable to contribute anything meaningful to the conversation because he hadn't been involved in any of the actual work. After Michael left, Paul stormed into my cubicle area like a tornado. His face was red with embarrassment and rage, and he didn't seem to care who heard him anymore. Don't get too comfortable in this situation, he said, his voice shaking with anger. Clients change their minds all the time. Projects get reassigned. One mistake from you, and this whole thing comes crashing down. But even as he threatened me, I could see the panic in his eyes. Paul was scared, and we both knew it. He'd built his reputation on being the guy who managed major accounts, and now he was being publicly bypassed by his own subordinate. I've been doing this for 15 years, he continued, his voice getting louder. I know how these relationships work. You think you're hot stuff now, but you're way out of your league. When this project fails, and it will fail, I'll be here to clean up your mess. I looked at him calmly, no longer intimidated by his bluster. The project isn't going to fail, Paul. And even if it did, that would be my responsibility to handle. His jaw clenched at my calm response. He was used to me being nervous and apologetic around him. This new version of me, the one who spoke confidently and didn't back down, clearly threw him off balance. He stormed back to his office without another word, slamming his door so hard that his nameplate rattled. A week later, my phone rang with a call that changed everything once again. Michael's name appeared on my caller ID, and I answered with my usual professional greeting. Rachel, I hope you have a few minutes to talk, he said. I have something I'd like to discuss with you privately. Of course, I replied, closing my laptop and giving him my full attention. I've been incredibly impressed with your work on this project, he began. Your strategic thinking, your creativity, your professionalism, everything has exceeded our expectations. Which brings me to why I'm calling. I held my breath, sensing that something big was coming. Have you ever thought about joining our company instead of staying where you are? We're looking for someone to head up our new marketing initiatives, and I can't think of anyone better suited for the role than you. I almost dropped the phone. A job offer. An actual job offer from a major client who had seen my work and wanted me to join his team. The role would come with a significant salary increase, full benefits, and the opportunity to build a marketing department from the ground up. You'd have complete creative control and a budget that would let you implement the kind of strategies you've been developing. I managed to find my voice. That's an incredible opportunity, Michael. Can I take some time to think it over? Absolutely. Take all the time you need. I didn't say yes immediately, even though every fiber of my being wanted to scream yes into the phone. Something told me to be strategic about this, to see how the situation would continue to play out before making my final decision. I really appreciate the offer, I told Michael. This is obviously a huge decision for me. Would it be possible to discuss the details more thoroughly next week? Of course, he replied. I completely understand wanting to think it through carefully. Why don't you take the weekend to consider it, and we can schedule a more detailed conversation early next week. After we hung up, I sat at my desk trying to process what had just happened. 6 months ago, I was the invisible junior team member that nobody took seriously. Now I had a client offering me a leadership position at his company. But I was curious to see how Paul would react if he knew what was happening. Would he finally start treating me with respect? Would he try to convince me to stay? Or would he double down on his hostile behavior? Part of me wanted to keep the job offer secret and see how far Paul would push things. I had a feeling his behavior was about to get much worse before it got better, and I wanted to document everything that happened. If I was going to leave this company, I wanted to make sure everyone understood exactly why. The next morning, something strange happened. Paul walked up to my cubicle carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing what I could only describe as a fake smile. "Morning, Rachel," he said in a tone that was trying way too hard to be friendly. "I brought you a coffee. Thought you might need the caffeine with all the hard work you've been putting in lately." I stared at him in shock. Paul bringing me coffee? Paul acknowledging my hard work? This was the same man who had told me to stick to bringing coffee instead of contributing ideas. "Thanks," I said cautiously, accepting the cup. "That's thoughtful of you." "You know, I've been thinking," he continued, perching on the edge of my desk like we were old friends. "I may have been a bit hard on you lately. You're showing real dedication to this project, and I wanted you to know that I've noticed." It was the most transparent performance I'd ever witnessed. Paul had clearly realized that his previous strategy of intimidation and punishment wasn't working, so now he was trying to play nice. Throughout the day, he continued the act, complimenting my dedication in front of other team members, asking for my valuable input on unrelated projects, even suggesting that we should collaborate more closely in the future. I almost laughed at how obvious it was. Paul could sense that something had shifted, and he was desperately trying to get back on my good side. The breaking point came during our next client meeting. Paul had spent the entire week preparing what he clearly thought was going to be his triumphant return to relevance. He'd prepared slides, talking points, and what seemed like a whole speech about our successful collaboration. But when the meeting started, Michael addressed his comments directly to me. "Rachel, can you walk us through the results from the first phase of the campaign?" I began presenting the data and analysis I'd prepared, explaining how our strategy had exceeded projected engagement rates and was already generating measurable results. That's when Paul made his fatal mistake. He interrupted me mid-sentence and said, "Actually, Michael, I developed most of these strategic elements that Rachel is presenting. I've been guiding her through the implementation process." The room went dead silent. Michael's expression shifted from friendly interest to barely contained outrage. "No," Michael said firmly, stopping Paul before he could continue. "Rachel developed this strategy. Rachel implemented these tactics. Rachel has been managing every aspect of this campaign from day one. Let her finish explaining her work." Paul's face went completely pale as the weight of his lie became obvious to everyone in the room. He just tried to take credit for my work in front of the very client who had been working directly with me for weeks. It was career suicide, and everyone knew it. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at my phone with Michael's contact information pulled up. The humiliation Paul had suffered in the meeting should have been enough revenge for anyone. But I realized that staying at this company meant more of the same toxic behavior, just from a more desperate and potentially vindictive Paul. I made the call. "Michael, it's Rachel," I said when he answered. "I've thought about your offer, and I'd like to accept the position." "That's fantastic news," he replied, and I could hear the genuine excitement in his voice. "I think you're going to love working here. When would you be able to start?" We spent the next hour discussing salary, benefits, start date, and responsibilities. The offer was even better than I'd originally understood. Not only would I be making 40% more than my current salary, but I'd have a team to manage and complete authority over marketing strategy. It was everything I'd dreamed of when I first started working in marketing. A chance to lead, to innovate, and to work for someone who actually valued my contributions. After we finalized the details, I spent the evening crafting my resignation letter. I wanted to be professional and gracious, but I also wanted to make it clear that I was leaving for a better opportunity, not running away from a difficult situation. The next morning, I would hand in my notice and officially close this chapter of my career. Walking into the office that morning with my resignation letter in hand felt like floating on air. I'd printed it out on good paper and signed it in my best handwriting. This was going to be a moment to remember. Paul was already at his desk when I knocked on his office door. He looked up with that same fake smile he'd been wearing all week. "Morning, Rachel. What can I do for you?" I handed him the letter, without saying a word. I wanted to watch his face as he read it, wanted to see the exact moment when he realized what was happening. His expression shifted from confusion to shock to anger as he read through my professional but final resignation letter. "You're quitting," he said, his voice rising. "After everything this company has done for you?" "I'm accepting a leadership position with Adams Creative," I replied calmly. "My last day will be Friday." Paul's face darkened as the full implications hit him. Not only was I leaving, but I was going to work for the very client he'd tried to impress. The client who had specifically requested to work with me instead of him. "You'll regret this decision," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "You think you're ready for that kind of responsibility, but you're not. You'll crash and burn within 6 months." I looked at him steadily and smiled. Funny, that's not what the client thinks. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new corner office, leading a team of 5 talented marketers and overseeing campaigns that have exceeded every performance metric we set. The project that started this whole journey has become a case study in successful rebranding that other companies are trying to replicate. Michael was right. I did love working here. I love having my ideas taken seriously, my strategies implemented without interference, and my contributions valued at their true worth. I love mentoring junior team members and making sure they never feel dismissed the way I was. But the most satisfying part isn't my success. It's what happened to Paul. The man who laughed at my ideas and told me to stick to bringing coffee? He lost the Adams account within a month of my departure. Without me there to execute the strategy, the campaign fell apart. Other clients started asking questions about the quality of work. Paul's credibility took a nosedive. Last I heard, he'd been restructured out of his management position and was working as a junior account coordinator at a much smaller agency. And me? I'm exactly where I always belonged, leading innovative campaigns, earning the respect I deserve, and proving every day that the best revenge is being undeniably excellent at what you do. The woman who used to bring Paul coffee now has assistants who bring me whatever I need. If this story of workplace justice inspired you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. There are so many more incredible stories of people standing up to toxic bosses and claiming the success they deserve. Your support means everything to me, and I can't wait to share more empowering stories about taking control of your career and never settling for less than your worth. Thank you for watching, and remember, your ideas matter, your contributions have value, and nobody has the right to make you feel small.